So there are two modern visualization techniques that you'll see a lot around, and they're very closely related. So one is tree maps and the other is bubble charts. So these are related. They come up in similar circumstances in terms of the mixture of dimensions and measures that they tend to show well, but they're not exactly the same. They have some pros and cons in both cases, obviously, that we should probably explore. So in addition to those, we're going to be seeing how to do this in Tableau, and we're going to be using our bookshop data set as we've been doing in the past. So the idea here is we're going to be exploring sales first, but then we'll branch out to some other areas to show off the various capabilities and kind of pluses and minuses of these two visualization types. So let's start by asking about sales. So let's go down and drag sales count up to size. So we're going to be thinking about size here as a fundamental quantity. So remember, in all visualizations, we're really just trying to use space effectively, and the size of a marker is one way we can use space, and we'll see others too, but this is a fundamental quantity in these particular visualizations. So let's break this down first by, let's do author. So let's break things down by author and by dragging author into detail. And notice what happens here. We get an explosion. So now the size of each one of these blocks here, each one of these squares or rectangles, is corresponding to the total number of sales generated by an author. So for instance, the area of this square associated with Thompson is proportional to 16,047, and the ratio between the area of this square and the area of this square is exactly the same as the ratio of Thompson's sales to Siegel's sales. So in this way, like, this whole area is our total sales, and we're seeing how it's broken up amongst the authors. So this is, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So let's do two more things. Let's drag. It's kind of hard to, like, the hover over is nice, but oftentimes we actually just want to see them. So if we drag last name into text here, it can show you which each one of these things is, or which author corresponds to each tile. And this is a tree map. So this is a tree map. Why it's called a tree map is actually not super clear. It comes from classification and regression trees in data science. But we use the name all the same. And in fact, if you go up to the show me and you actually look at the visualizations that Tableau is suggesting right now, Treemap is one of those. And notice if I click this, I'm actually not a huge fan of this, because here the color is denoting the number of sales, but this is totally redundant right now. This is totally redundant because the size of the block is already related to sales. We don't need another precious dimension, another precious attribute like size or color or shape or something like this. We don't need to waste another one of those on something that we're already displaying well. So let's instead use color for something more interesting. So let's, for instance, use genre. So genre is located within the book sheet, and we're going to drag this up to color. And notice what's happened. The organization has really changed, and what Tableau has tried to do is put all the things of similar color right next to each other. And this is really helpful, actually, because if this entire area represents our sales, this particular region now represents science fiction. This region down here represents mystery. The downside of this way of viewing it is that now some authors are split up across areas. So, for instance, Malamud is here in mystery and also here in fiction. Just if we're thinking about sales as our top level object, and then genre is the next one down, and then author. It could be the case that authors are split across genres. It depends what story you're trying to tell. This is clearly a story about sales as a function of genre first, and then author second. You could imagine flipping that around if you wanted to. So tree maps are really good in cases where the whole really makes sense, like the area of the full thing is a meaningful quantity. So here the area of the full rectangle is the total number of sales we've made, and then we really can think about this much of the total sales was dedicated to this genre, and this much of the total sales was dedicated to this genre. But imagine we change this a little bit, and we said instead of looking at sales, we wanted to look at hours of writing per day. And I'm going to drag this to my size now. So again, all I've done here is changed the size from the number of sales to the number of hours of writing per day. But here's my claim: the total number of hours that all the authors write per day, like summing up across all the authors, how much time they spend writing per day, is not a meaningful quantity. Like, it doesn't. Like, what's the point of thinking about that? It doesn't impact our decisions in any way. But that's not to say it's not interesting to compare. It's just to say that the sum of all of these things is not a meaningful quantity. This is where bubble charts really excel. So if we go over to the show me, you'll see that the tree map is like not grayed out, but also the packed bubble chart is not grayed out. And so if we click this thing, notice what we get. So instead of having little tiles for each one of our regions, we now have little bubbles. This size of the bubble is still corresponding to the amount of hours that each author spends writing. So there's still size in here. The color is still the genre in this case, and we still have one bubble per author. So most of the things are the same, except we're not pretending like the area of the whole area of the bubbles is a meaningful quantity. And in fact, if you displayed this on a tree map, you would be misleading people into thinking that it was. And similarly, if you were showing the sales in a bubble chart, you'd be misleading people, or you wouldn't be telling the full story because you're not showing them what proportion of the total is. So this brings us to really the big distinction. We use bubble charts in cases where the sum of all of the areas is not meaningful. Things like the total number of hours written, or the total like the average review that a author receives, or things like this, where it's just like, well, who cares like what the sum of all the average reviews is, or who cares what the sum of all the hours that people have written is. That's just not, we don't care about that quantity. We do, however, care about total sales and total revenue and total cost, things like this. And in those cases, a tree map is really appropriate. So, like I said, very similar. We only use tree maps in cases where the sum of the total is, or the sum to the total is meaningful, and we use bubble charts when it's not. Otherwise, they're both really great ways to give users access to some really compelling and very high data to ink ratio information.